When chaos strikes, comedy follows, from goats shutting down cities to spaghetti storms, beer floods, and even neon squirrels. Welcome to season 3 of So Weird, So Funny, Chaos Reloaded. Brace yourself, because the weirdest disasters are often the funniest ones.
What happens when an entire army declares war on birds? Not eagles, not hawks, just a bunch of oversized, flightless emus. It was supposed to be just another harvest season in Western Australia 1932. Farmers worried about crops, politicians promised help. Nothing unusual until the emus came. 30,000 emus marched across fields like feathered tanks. The government called in soldiers, real soldiers, with machine guns. Farmers cheered, victory was certain. But the emus outran the bullets. Machine guns jammed, soldiers missed, birds scattered and regrouped. Every time the army thought they had them cornered, the emus sprinted off like Olympic sprinters. Reporters laughed, headlines screamed, emus outgunned the army. Farmers shook their heads, kids giggled, the world couldn't believe Australia was losing to birds. After weeks of gunfire, the army admitted defeat. The emus strutted away, undefeated champions of the outback. Australia had lost, the Great Emu War. So weird. So funny. Imagine chopping off a chicken's head, but instead of dinner, it kept on clucking for 2 more years. Meet Mike, the headless chicken who just refused to die. It was supposed to be just another farm chore in 1945, Colorado. Farmer Lloyd Olson swung his axe, ready for a Sunday dinner. One clean strike, job done, or so he thought. But instead of collapsing, Mike shook his feathers, and calmly walked away. No head, no problem. He even strutted around, flapped his wings, and pretended to peck without a beak. Turns out the axe had spared his jugular vein and most of his brain stem. Mike could still breathe, digest, and balance. His owner fed him with an eyedropper directly into the neck. Word spread fast. Crowds lined up to see the miracle headless chicken. Newspapers screamed headlines, scientists came to study him. Mike became a touring star. One missed Sunday dinner turned into 2 years of fame. From chopping block to spotlight, Mike proved you don't need a head to make headlines. Imagine walking down the street and getting swept away not by water, but by beer. Sounds like a drunk man's dream, but in London, 1974, it was terrifyingly real. It was supposed to be just another busy day at the Horseshoe Brewery. Massive iron vats of porter beer stood tall, each holding hundreds of thousands of liters. The workers checked the gauges, heard the hum of machinery, and then a crack. One of the giant vats burst. The pressure knocked loose another, and another, like dominoes made of steel and foam. Suddenly, more than 1 million liters of beer were set free, rushing like a tsunami through London's narrow streets. The wave smashed through walls, flooded basements, and swept away carts, furniture, even people. Neighbors screamed, children climbed onto rooftops, horses bolted in panic. It wasn't water drowning the city, it was booze. When the flood settled, streets reeked of alcohol, homes were destroyed, and several people had drowned in beer. The brewery faced outrage, lawsuits, and became infamous for serving London's deadliest pint. Scientists call it a structural failure. But locals? They called it the night London drank too much. Proof once again, when chaos comes in waves, sometimes it's beer, not water. Imagine 2 superpowers bringing armies, cannons, and warships. Not for gold. Not for land. But for a pig eating potatoes. It was supposed to be just another quiet day on San Juan Island, 1859. American farmers tended their fields, British settlers minded their herds. But when one pig wandered into a potato patch, and an angry farmer pulled the trigger, history went off the rails. The British were outraged. The Americans refused to back down. From one dead pig, both sides began calling in troops. Within weeks, 500 U.S. soldiers faced 2,000 British troops with warships offshore, cannons loaded, muskets ready. And all of it, over that one pig. The world braced for war. But after months of standoff, both sides agreed to a truce. No shots fired. No one killed. they called it the Pig War. A war where the only casualty was the pig. Sometimes history doesn't need heroes or villains. Just one hungry hog. A sky full of balloons looks magical, right? Until it wasn't. It was supposed to be a glorious world record. Over 1.5 million balloons released into the sky at once. Crowds cheered as the blue sky turned into a rainbow sea. For a moment, it was breathtaking. TV crews filmed, newspapers flashed. Everyone thought they were witnessing history. But then the wind changed. Balloons drifted into airport runways, grounding planes. Thousands fell into a lake, suffocating fish. Streets clogged, ambulances trapped. What was wonder turned into sheer panic. Instead of fame, the city got lawsuits, chaos, and weeks of cleanup. The beautiful record became an environmental and logistical nightmare. They wanted the biggest balloon release ever. They got the weirdest balloon disaster in history. So weird. So funny. Have you ever imagined, instead of rain, spaghetti falling from the sky? Sounds delicious, but be careful what you wish for. It was supposed to be a calm afternoon in a little Italian town. Locals strolled across the square, children kicked soccer balls, grandmothers hung laundry. But then, the clouds turned red, and the air filled with the smell of tomato sauce. Boom! Golden noodles came pouring down like a storm. They covered rooftops, cars, even the church bell tower. People screamed, children laughed, and mopeds slipped and skidded on pasta streets. The town square became a sea of spaghetti. The soccer match turned into a noodle fight, with players rolling in laughter. The fountain no longer spouted water, it spewed pasta instead. By nightfall, spaghetti piled knee-high. Tourists snapped endless selfies, chefs rushed in with pots and pans. But sewers clogged, traffic froze, and pigeons waddled around, fatter than cats. Scientists, a highly unusual weather phenomenon. Villagers, the sauciest day in history. Boston, winter of 1919. A quiet afternoon, until the city was swallowed by a wave of sticky sweetness. A giant steel tank, 50 feet tall, holding over 2 million gallons of molasses. It was supposed to be safe, solid, and everlasting, fuel for the booming rum industry. Instead, it became a ticking time bomb. On January 15, the temperature suddenly rose. The thin steel walls began to groan and crack. Neighbors heard strange noises, metal straining against pressure, then, in an instant, boom! The tank exploded. A 5-meter-high wave of molasses surged through the streets at nearly 35 miles per hour. Houses, horses, wagons, even a train car, were swept away. People were trapped, glued to the ground by the sticky tide. When the flood receded, 21 lives lost, over 150 injured. Cleanup took weeks. And for decades after, the north end of Boston still smelled faintly of molasses on hot days. They called it the Great Molasses Flood. The sweetest and stickiest disaster in history. Face with tears of joy honeypot. A fish that survives for years, without water? Sounds impossible, but nature doesn't play by our rules. It was supposed to be the end of the line. The riverbeds cracked, the sun scorched the mud, and every fish floated belly up. No water, no life, that's how it's supposed to work. But the lungfish had other plans. Long, slimy, and ancient, it dug deep into the mud, secreted slime, and sealed itself inside a hardened cocoon like a mummy waiting for rain. Days passed. Weeks turned to months. Incredibly, some lungfish survived not just one season, but years underground, breathing air with its lung, slowing life down to a crawl, feeding on its own reserves. Then the sky finally broke. Rain hammered the ground, rivers filled, and the mud cocoon split open. Out wriggled the lungfish alive, hungry, and swimming again like nothing happened. Scientists call it the ultimate survivor. We just call it weird, funny, and kind of terrifying. A fish that naps through years of drought, and still wakes up in time for breakfast. Boston, winter of 1919. A quiet afternoon, until the city was swallowed by a wave of sticky sweetness. A giant steel tank, 50 feet tall, holding over 2 million gallons of molasses. It was supposed to be safe, solid, and everlasting, fuel for the booming rum industry. Instead, it became a ticking time bomb. On January 15, the temperature suddenly rose. The thin steel walls began to groan and crack. Neighbors heard strange noises, metal straining against pressure, then, in an instant, boom. The tank exploded. A 5-meter-high wave of molasses surged through the streets at nearly 35 miles per hour. Houses, horses, wagons, even a train car, were swept away. People were trapped, glued to the ground by the sticky tide. When the flood receded, 21 lives lost, over 150 injured. Cleanup took weeks. And for decades after, the north end of Boston still smelled faintly of molasses on hot days. They called it the Great Molasses Flood. The sweetest and stickiest disaster in history. Face with tears of joy honeypot.
India, summer 2019. In the crowded streets of Malappuram, one goat makes a break for freedom. And chaos begins. The goat sprints through traffic at rush hour. Cars screech, horns blare, the city grinds to a halt. Crowds gather, laughing and shouting. Phones go up, live streams explode. Catch that goat, police join the chase. For 2 hours they sprint through markets, over bridges, across parks, while the goat refuses to quit. Finally, the runaway leaps onto the roof of a police car, standing tall like the king of the street. The crowd erupts in laughter, clips go viral worldwide. The goat returns home, but the cops, they'll be the joke for days.